All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental, the scientific method.
Ooh.
Yeah, the one we all learned about in school. But trust me, we're going way deeper than those textbook basics. We're using excerpts from Wikipedia, articles on the history and philosophy of the scientific method, and let me tell you, it gets a lot more interesting and a lot more complex than you might think.
Yeah, definitely. You hit the nail on the head there. The idea that there's one rigid scientific method, like a recipe you just follow, is kind of a myth. What's really fascinating is how that myth has been challenged and reshaped over time.
So let's bust that myth wide open. We keep coming across this guy, Karl Popper, in our sources. Who is he, and why is he such a big deal in science?
Well, Karl Popper was a philosopher, really shook things up in the 20th century. He said, for something to be truly scientific, it needs to be falsifiable.
Falsifiable.
Yeah, meaning a theory has to be testable in a way that could potentially prove it wrong. Like if you can't even imagine a test that could disprove your idea, then according to Popper, you're not really doing science.
That's a pretty bold statement. So if a theory can't be disproven, it's not scientific. I mean, what does that even mean for things like astronomy, where it's hard to run those controlled experiments?
That's a great question. It really highlights the nuance here. Popper was all about deductive reasoning. You start with a general principle and test it against specific cases.
Okay.
But as you said, not all scientific fields can use that approach. And that's where some of the pushback against Popper comes in.
Right. Our Wikipedia deep dive mentions some heavy hitters who took issue with his ideas. Thomas Kuhn, Paul Feyerabend, and Imre Lakatos.
Yeah, these guys argued that science is messier, more dynamic, influenced by, the context of its time.
I see.
They pointed out that scientific communities often work within paradigms.
Paradigms.
Yeah, frameworks of accepted theories and methods. You could think of it like a scientific club with its own rules and lingo.
Okay, so like a scientific club with its own rules and lingo. But wouldn't that lead to a lot of groupthink? I mean, how do new ideas ever break through if everyone's stuck in their own paradigm?
Well, that's exactly Kuhn's argument. He even said that new scientific truths often win out, not through persuasion, but because the scientists who oppose them eventually, they die off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a bit morbid, but it gets you thinking about how social and cultural factors can actually shape scientific progress.
That is pretty dark, but it definitely makes you think. Okay, so if there's not one single universal scientific method, how can we even define what it is?
Right. Well, instead of thinking of it as a rigid set of steps, think of the scientific method as more of an iterative, cyclical process. It's guided by some core principles, kind of like a flexible framework, adapts to the specific questions you're investigating.
So it's more like guidelines than a recipe.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so can you give our listeners a taste of what those guidelines might be?
Sure. Well, it typically starts with characterization and observation. This involves carefully and systematically studying a phenomenon, often using measurements and collecting data.
Okay.
Then from there, scientists develop a hypothesis.
That's the explanation.
Right. A testable explanation for what they've observed. And based on that hypothesis, they'll make predictions and design experiments to see if those predictions hold up.
So it's about constantly moving between observation, explanation, and testing. Sounds more like a detective's investigation than following a recipe.
That's a great analogy. And just like a good detective, scientists have to be open to revising their hypotheses based on the evidence they gather. It's all about this interplay between theory and experiment,
Right.
where each informs and refines the other.
And this is where communication and publication come in, right? Scientists don't just keep their experiments to themselves. They got to share their findings with the whole scientific community.
Absolutely. That's vital. It lets other scientists scrutinize the work, replicate experiments, and build upon the existing knowledge, like a global conversation. This constant back and forth that really drives scientific progress.
That reminds me of what our Wikipedia source says about Alhazen. He was a scientist way back in the 11th century. He studied light refraction and figured out that space was less dense than air. And then, years later, Ibn Muad built upon Alhazen's work to estimate the thickness of Earth's atmosphere.
That's a fantastic example of how science builds upon itself over time. One scientist's discovery becomes a stepping stone for other, leading to a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of, the natural world.
So the scientific method sounds less like some rigid structure and more like a living, breathing entity. But this whole process hinges on the idea that scientists can be objective, right?
Yeah, that's where things get even more interesting. Let's unpack that next.
Yeah, that's a really good point. This idea that science is purely objective, like untouched by human bias. It's kind of an ideal. The reality is scientists are people, right? They've got their own perspectives, preconceptions, even egos sometimes.
So how can we really trust the results if scientists are bringing their own baggage to the table?
It's a valid concern. And it's why the scientific method, even though it aims for objectivity, it also builds in checks and balances to try and mitigate that bias. Okay, so what are some of the safeguards that help keep scientists honest and keep those results as unbiased as possible?
Well, one big one is peer review.
Peer review.
Right, before a scientist's findings can be published, their work is scrutinized by other experts in the field.
Yeah.
It helps to catch errors, identify weaknesses, and just make sure the conclusions are really supported by the evidence.
So it's like a team of scientific fact checkers.
That's a good way to put it. It's not perfect, of course, but it does add a layer of accountability, and it helps to weed out sloppy work or, outright fraud.
Right. Makes sense. Our Wikipedia source also mentions this concept of situated cognition. What's that all about?
Situated cognition basically highlights how a researcher's background, their experiences, can actually shape their interpretations.
Okay.
It's like that saying, you see what you're looking for?
Yeah. Right.
Two scientists might observe the exact same thing, but draw different conclusions based on their pre-existing knowledge and how they understand things.
Yeah. We all have our own filters, right? Our brains are always making connections and trying to find patterns.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for scientists to be aware of their own biases, to really seek out different perspectives and be open to changing their minds when new evidence comes along.
So this all makes the scientific process sound pretty messy. It's not just about collecting data and crunching numbers. It's about this whole web of human perspectives and potential biases.
You got it. And that's why critical thinking and skepticism are so essential in science.
Right.
It's not about blindly accepting what you hear, even if it comes from someone who seems like an authority.
Oh, yeah.
It's about questioning, demanding evidence, and being willing to change your mind when you see a really compelling argument.
So even within the scientific community, there's this constant back and forth, this push and pull of ideas.
Absolutely. Healthy debate and disagreement are crucial for scientific progress. Scientists are constantly challenging each other's findings, proposing different explanations, and trying to refine their understanding.
It's like the scientific method itself is kind of an experiment, always being tested and refined over time.
That's a great observation. And that actually brings us to another really fascinating aspect, the role of heuristics in evaluating scientific theories.
Okay, heuristics. Sounds like a fancy word. Break it down for us.
Sure. Think of heuristics as mental shortcuts, rules of thumb that scientists use to kind of guide their theory selection. It's not just about gathering data, but also about how you interpret that data and decide which theories are more likely to be true.
So it's like a scientist's gut feeling, but isn't science supposed to be all about logic and evidence, not intuition?
It's a balance. Heuristics aren't about ditching logic, but they do acknowledge that scientific judgment goes beyond just the cold, hard data.
I see. Our Wikipedia source mentions all these criteria for evaluating theories, things like accuracy, consistency, explanatory power, and even things like elegance and parsimony. It sounds like scientists are looking for theories that are not just, backed up by data, but also aesthetically pleasing in a way.
That's a great point. There's a sense that a really good theory should be elegant, have a simplicity that captures the essence of the phenomenon without being too complex.
Okay, and one heuristic that keeps popping up is Occam's razor. Can you remind us what that one's all about?
Occam's razor basically states that the simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest assumptions, is usually the best. It's this principle of parsimony favoring simplicity.
So if two theories can explain the same thing, the one with fewer moving parts is probably the better bet. But doesn't that seem kind of arbitrary?
Yeah, it's definitely not foolproof, and it does have its critics. But it can be a useful guideline, especially when you're dealing with competing theories that both seem to be equally supported by the evidence.
Okay, so Occam's razor helps scientists avoid getting too fancy with their explanations. What about invariance? That was another one of the criteria.
Invariance is really interesting. It suggests that scientists often look for explanations that hold true, regardless of perspective or your frame of reference. Like finding principles that are really fundamental and universal, not just tied to one specific viewpoint.
It's like looking for that underlying code of the universe, right? The rules that govern everything, no matter where you are or how you're looking at it.
That's a great way to think about it. It's about finding patterns and principles that are really robust, enduring, and not dependent on specific circumstances.
Our source mentions one of Einstein's thought experiments. He imagined a lab suspended in space, and by thinking about how an observer inside would experience acceleration and gravity, he was able to connect these ideas in a way that went beyond any specific situation.
Yeah, Einstein was amazing at finding those invariant principles, those fundamental laws that govern how the universe behaves at its most basic level.
This whole discussion about heuristics really makes me realize that science isn't as cut and dried as I thought. There's so much interpretation, judgment, even a bit of artistry involved.
Absolutely. And that's why understanding the scientific method is so much more than just memorizing steps. It's about appreciating all the nuances, the complexities, and the constant debates that shape how we understand the world.
Speaking of ongoing debates, let's talk about two biggies in the world of science. Deductive versus inductive reasoning.
Right, right. These are like two fundamental ways of thinking that come
Yeah.
up all the time in scientific inquiry.
All the time. Deductive reasoning starts with things we already know to be true, established truths, and uses them to build new knowledge.
Okay.
It's like starting with a general principle and then applying it to specific cases. If A equals B and B equals C, then A must also equal C. You're connecting the dots in this logical way.
Ah, I see. And a classic example is using Einstein's theories to make predictions about what should happen.
Right, you're building upon a well-established framework.
Okay, so that's deductive, whereas inductive reasoning goes in the opposite direction, right? It starts with observations and then tries to figure out a general conclusion.
Precisely. It's like putting together a puzzle.
You have these individual pieces of evidence, and you're trying to see the bigger picture, what it all represents.
Right.
Like our source mentions the observation of Mercury's perihelion anomaly, a little wobble in its orbit that couldn't be explained by Newton's laws.
Oh, yeah.
That observation, along with others, eventually led to Einstein's theory of general relativity. It was this big inductive leap, a bold inference based on careful observation and analysis of something that didn't make sense at the time.
So both deductive and inductive reasoning are important tools for scientists.
Absolutely.
They allow us to move back and forth between big ideas and specific observations. It's how we constantly refine and expand our understanding of things.
Exactly. And it's this dynamic interplay between the two that often drives progress in science.
I see.
Sometimes a deductive insight leads to new observations, which then sparks an inductive leap to a whole new theory.
Right.
And the cycle goes on and on.
But even with all these cool tools and principles, the scientific method isn't without its limitations, is it? Our world is getting more complex, more data than ever.
You're right to point that out. And the Wikipedia source does highlight some of the challenges, especially when we're trying to apply the scientific method to these really complex systems and huge data sets.
Right, like the whole field of big data, that's a whole new set of challenges. I feel like having too much data can be just as tricky as not having enough data.
That's such a key insight. The source talks about this challenge of predictive analytics in the age of big data.
Yeah.
We have so much data that it's tempting to think, oh, we can predict anything.
But I'm guessing it's not that simple.
Not at all. Sometimes all that data obscures the underlying principles of the relationships we're trying to understand. Plus, sifting through mountains of data, it can lead to spurious correlations, connections that look statistically significant, but are actually totally meaningless.
Right, so it's not just about crunching the numbers, it's about asking the right questions, filtering out all the noise and finding the real signal in all that data.
Precisely. It takes critical thinking, a healthy dose of skepticism, and a deep understanding of what statistical analysis can and cannot do.
It seems like the scientific method, while super powerful, still has a lot of work to do in this era of big data and increasingly complex systems.
It does. The scientific method isn't some magical answer for all our problems. It's a set of tools and principles that's always evolving, always being refined to make sense of the world. And as the world changes, well, our methods have to adapt too.
That makes me think about fields like astronomy or the social sciences where you can't really run controlled experiments in the traditional sense.
Right.
So how does the scientific method even apply in those situations?
That's a fantastic question, and it really highlights how flexible the scientific method can be.
Okay.
In fields where you can't easily control every variable, scientists use different methods like observational studies, statistical modeling, even computer simulations.
So it's about finding the right tools for the job, recognizing that not all scientific work fits into that neat textbook model.
Absolutely. And it's really important to remember that every approach comes with its own strengths and limitations.
Man, This has been a mind-blowing journey. We started by busting those myths about a single scientific method.
Right.
And now we're talking about the complexities of heuristics, the challenges of objectivity, the dance between deductive and inductive reasoning.
We've barely scratched the surface.
I know, right?
But hopefully this little glimpse into how science works with all its twists and turns and ongoing debates gives our listener a deeper appreciation for the process.
I totally agree. But before we wrap up, I want to switch gears a bit and bring things back down to earth. Literally.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you have in mind?
We've been talking about this like it's just for professional scientists, researchers in their labs publishing papers. But what about the rest of us? How can we, as non-scientists, apply these principles of the scientific method to our everyday lives?
That's such a fantastic question. And it goes to the heart of why understanding the scientific method is so valuable, even if you never set foot in a lab. Those core principles we've been discussing, observation, hypothesis, testing, and refining those, are things you can use in so many different situations.
So it's not just about Bunsen burners and test tubes.
Nope, not at all. It's about being curious, paying attention, and being willing to question what you think you know. It's approaching problems with this evidence-based mindset.
Can you give our listeners some concrete examples of how they might use the scientific method in their everyday life?
Sure. Imagine you're trying to fix something on your computer.
Right?
Instead of randomly clicking around hoping for the best, you can take a more systematic approach.
Okay, so first I'd carefully observe what's happening.
Exactly.
What are the error messages? What programs are running?
Yep, you're gathering data.
Okay.
Then, based on what you see, you might come up with a hypothesis about what's causing the problem. Maybe one program is interfering with another, or maybe a setting needs to be changed.
Right. Then I could test it out, see what happens if I close a program or change a setting.
You got it. You're experimenting, getting more data. If your hypothesis is right, great.
Right.
If not, well, you go back, revise, and try again. That cycle of observation, hypothesis testing, and refinement is just like scientific research.
It's amazing how those same principles can apply in such a practical way. What are some other examples?
Think about trying a new recipe.
Okay.
You're essentially conducting a little experiment, right? Following the steps, seeing how it turns out. If it doesn't go as planned, you figure out what went wrong, tweak the recipe, and try again.
Right.
It's all about that iterative process, refining your approach.
Or even just deciding which way to go to work in the morning.
Exactly. You might have an idea of the fastest route, maybe based on traffic patterns or past experience.
Right.
But you can actually test it out, try different routes, and keep track of how long it takes you. You're gathering data and actually refining your understanding.
I'm really starting to see how this scientific way of thinking applies to so much of life.
That's one of the most important takeaways I hope our listeners get from this episode. The scientific method isn't just for scientists. It's a toolkit for anyone who wants to understand the world better and make more informed choices. It's all about that curiosity, critical thinking, and testing out your ideas.
This has been so insightful, but we are nearing the end of our deep dive, and I always like to leave our listener with something to really ponder.
I like that. I think the challenge, especially in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides, is to apply these principles, the critical thinking, the skepticism that's at the heart of the scientific method, to all the information we encounter.
So it's not just about understanding the scientific method in theory, but actually putting it into practice in our lives.
Exactly. Think about the news you read, the social media posts you scroll through, the things people say in ads or in speeches. How can you use what we've talked about today, the observation, hypothesis, and evidence-based reasoning, to figure out what's actually true and reliable?
That's a tough one in this digital age. It's so easy to get caught up in those sensational headlines or those emotionally charged arguments.
It is. But the scientific method reminds us to slow down, look at the evidence, and really think things through.
It's about being a more discerning consumer of information, not just passively taking it all in.
Exactly.
It's about having that healthy skepticism and demanding proof, especially when something sounds too good to be true.
Absolutely.
And even when we see something that fits with what we already believe,
Right.
it's so important to apply that same level of scrutiny, be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
You got it. It's about challenging our own biases and really trying to see things objectively, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
This has been an incredible journey, busting myths, exploring all those core principles of the scientific method, and even thinking about how to use it in our everyday lives.
It's been a pleasure, really.
Me too. But we are at the end of our deep dive. So to our listener, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep that scientific spirit alive. We'll see you next time for another deep dive. It really makes you feel like you can take charge, when you realize you can apply this kind of thinking to anything.
Yeah, totally. And especially these days, when there's so much misinformation flying around, having those skills is more important than ever.
It's like we're giving our listeners a toolkit for navigating the 21st century. I mean, things are changing so fast.
Exactly. And just like the scientific method's always evolving, we have to keep our critical thinking skills sharp to keep up with all this new information.
It's a constant process of learning and unlearning and relearning, isn't it? And I think that takes a lot of humility.
Yeah, for sure.
Admitting that we don't have all the answers and that what we think is true today might change tomorrow.
Absolutely. That humility is key. It's what lets us stay open to new evidence, challenge our own ideas, and be okay with not knowing everything.
It's the opposite of just blindly believing something, right? This way of thinking, it embraces questioning and being willing to change your mind when you see convincing evidence.
Precisely. That's what makes the scientific method so powerful and enduring. It's not about clinging to fixed beliefs. It's about constantly searching for a deeper, more accurate understanding of the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope our listeners take away from all of this?
I hope they come away from this with a renewed sense of curiosity, a healthy skepticism of easy answers, and just a love of learning, because the scientific method, at its heart, it's all about that journey of discovery, constantly asking questions, trying to understand more about ourselves and the universe around us.
That's beautifully said. This deep dive has been quite a ride. We've looked at the historical roots of the scientific method, how it works in practice, and even how we can all use it in our everyday lives.
It really has been. It's been a pleasure exploring all this with you and our listeners.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep that scientific spirit alive. We'll catch you next time for another deep dive.